Hello there, thanks for your interest in this EVN Masterclass. At the start of the actual recording of this Masterclass, we had a few technical difficulties, which meant that we started late and I wasn't able to give a proper introduction to our speaker. So I'm just recording this to explain why it's slightly disjointed at the beginning and also to give Manuel a proper introduction. So Dr. Manuel Herrera is a Senior Policy Fellow at BASIC. He's the Programme Manager of the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Programme and the Project Manager of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Monitor Project. Manuel conducts research in the field of non-proliferation and disarmament with a specific expertise in the Iranian nuclear programme and nuclear diplomacy in the context of the NPT. Previously, Manuel was Research Fellow at the Multilateralism Global Governance Programme at the Istituto Affari Internazionali, IAI, in Rome, where he co-managed IAA's activities within the EU Non-Proliferation Disarmament Consortium. He was also a research assistant in the Nuclear Security Programme at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies at New Delhi, India, worked at the Office of Geopolitical Analysis of the Spanish Ministry of Defence, was an EUN PDC intern within the Next Generation Programme at the Institute for Foreign and International Policy in Madrid. Finally, Manuel was a non-doctoral fellow at the Centre for International Studies in Lisbon and a visiting researcher in the Peace Research Institute Frankfurt. Okay, that's all from me, and you'll hear from a different me in a moment. Enjoy the talk. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this Expert Masterclass. I am going to skip the introduction because we are running a bit late on time, and I will pass you over to Manuel Herrera, and he's going to be giving the masterclass today. Please go ahead, Manuel.
Yeah. Yes. Well, just a small introduction. I mean, just in case, but because I'm not going to assume that everyone knows or have read all the information about the bio. But I'm Manuel Herrera. I'm the program manager for the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament program here at BASIC, and I'm also project manager for the NPT monitor, which is one of the projects or the main project that we are going to talk today about. But before getting in depth about what's the purpose of the NPT monitor, I think that we need to also try to understand why the NPT monitor was conceptualized and why we saw ourselves in the need, let's say, as a responsible and proactive think tank that wants to be ahead of the curve on the main issues and problems that happen in our in the international system right now. We need to first understand why the NPT monitor is needed in the current nuclear landscape. In this regard, this is something that we discussed internally quite a few times. Dave and myself, we were trying to, when drafting or creating this masterclass, we were thinking about, okay, how we can entitle the current situation and the current status of the international system, and specifically of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Regime and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. And I think that the best idea that we came with was that we are facing, or the treaty is facing, quite significant crisis. And it's a crisis linked with its credibility. The credibility of the NPT, of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, is under unprecedented scrutiny, as long-standing challenges such as the modernization of nuclear arsenals, the lack of progress on negative security assurances, divisive debates over nuclear sharing, and persistent non-compliance with disarmament obligations under Article 6 have become more entrenched, exposing, of course, the fragility of the regime long considered to be the cornerstone of the international security architecture. Actually, it's quite interesting, and this is something that I reflected with my colleagues at BASIC as well. That my colleagues that came with me to the NPT PrepCon this year, there was this great speech, this great discourse about the NPT being the cornerstone of the international security architecture and international non-proliferation regime, and still no major advancement was taken forward in order to address most of the structural problems that the treaty and the regime as such face. The effect is a moment, of course, of astounding vulnerability for the treaty, marked by a rapidly shifting security environment, and of course growing distrust between the nuclear open states and the non-nuclear open states, as well as the reemergence of nuclear brinkmanship and the erosion of traditional arms control agreements between great powers. Some of these challenges are time sensitive, as they affect the current working procedures of the NPT, both the PrepCon and, of course, the future REFCON. As a consequence, I think it's better to try to categorize, I will give some flashpoints, which would be mostly 4 to 5 flashpoints about what I consider based on my most recent analysis of the current status of the NPT, the NPT regime, and of course, as we were developing the NPT monitor, what are the current challenges in the regime that affect the treaty and affect the well functioning of the treaty as such. And I think that the first thing, it's more or less related with, of course, we can discuss the problems of the review procedure, the way the treaty is reviewed every 5 years, the review process. But I think that which is a more structural problem of the treaty, and that would require almost, I would say, an impossible amount of consensus to make reforms. I think that we should not focus so much on the failures in the procedure of revising or reviewing the treaty every 5 years, but on the risks of actually not obtaining a final consensus on the next review conference. Because the thing would, I mean, we can have a huge conversation about whether the review process is the correct one or we must modify that. That's I think another debate. But I think that some basic consensus are needed just on basic stuff in order to reach a final outcome document for the next review conference in 2026. Because as far as you know already, two review conferences in 2015 and 2022 ended without agreement on an outcome document. And of course, with persistent disagreements still unresolved on the scope of, for instance, the implementation of Article 4, on the implementation of Article 6, and specifically in the case of Article 6, there is a lack of advancements in nuclear disarmament, while at the same time, nuclear weapon states are engaging in modernization programs for the nuclear arsenals, as well as a lack of consensus on some normative aspects of the implementation of Article 10. All these issues make that the credibility of the NPT's core bargain, like that non-nuclear weapon states will refrain from developing nuclear weapons in exchange for disarmament by the nuclear weapon states, is now seriously under pressure or seriously questioned. And without concrete commitments and verifiable steps, the NPT will continue to erode as the cornerstone, let's say, of the international non-proliferation regime. And a credible roadmap to implement the 3 pillars of the treaty must be developed with specific and measurable benchmarks and timelines. And this is actually one of the points that I will address later regarding the NPT monitor, because the NPT monitor will focus specifically on this aspect of the erosion of the treaty and its normative framework. In any case, without consensus between the state parties to the treaty, without reaching agreements internally in the context of the treaty, and without these agreements,
we're now approaching Milton Keynes Central.
When leaving us here, make sure you have all your luggage and belongings with you, and please mind.
Oh, what? Okay. Sorry. No, without agreements and consensus, without actions that are reflected on those consensus, the NPT risks, of course, to be politically relevant. I'm not saying that the NPT will collapse. I mean, that's also this different debate or discussion, because there has been some authors who have put forward that with a third NPT review conference without outcome document, the treaty will collapse. And although I'm not supporting that statement or that approach or that position at all, I think that there's risk of political irrelevance, what I used to call the political apathy vis-a-vis the treaty. Basically, the idea is that the treaty it's important in the sense that it's the only treaty that regulates these matters at its core basis, and as a consequence, state parties know that they cannot not let it die as such. Like not everyone can just leave the treaty like that, but it's true that there would be some kind of political apathy vis-a-vis the state parties to the treaty, that they will just basically don't engage with the activities and the debates in the context of the treaty, and we might reach that scenario. The second point that I think that it's also as well affecting the treaty and it's eroding the treaty. And again, this is very important because you will see that this is an issue that it's outside the treaty but affects to the core functioning of the treaty. It's of course the cases of non-compliance in the context of the in the context of Pillar 1, which actually Pillar 2 for some, which is the non-proliferation pillar, and specifically the issue about Iran's nuclear program. And I think that Iran's nuclear program is actually affecting, and the recent developments that have happened in the last few weeks or days are really putting way more pressure on the treaty that we might actually think. The unresolved tensions surrounding Iran's nuclear program continue to jeopardize the stability of the broader, what we can call the broader non-proliferation regime as a whole. And of course, it's a direct attack or a direct challenge to the non-proliferation pillar in the treaty. Since the US withdrawal from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, in 2018, and of course, and the subsequent imposition of US sanctions, Iran has taken incremental steps away from the original agreement, from the JCPOA, and this has included, of course, the expansion of enrichment activities and the limiting the access of the International Atomic Energy Agency. The current political landscape is even more volatile than in 2015 when the JCPOA was adopted, and Iran's nuclear program is more advanced, its leadership in Tehran is more hardline, and mutual trust is more fragile, particularly after the aggression by Iran, and of course, particularly more with after the US bombings on Iran's enrichment facilities. So we are not in a position right now that we can actually see in the near future any possible agreement or understanding between Iran and the US on this matter. And should current tensions escalate further and diplomatic efforts fail, of course, and Iran, of course, decides to withdraw from the NPT, which they already have passed or put forward a bill in the Iranian parliament to do that, the NPT would be under real pressure, because Iran is not, let's say, it's not a minor country inside the NPT. It's quite a problematic, let's say, has been repeatedly quite a problematic actor inside the NPT and inside the context of international nuclear politics. Such a move, of course, will also nullify decades of regional non-proliferation efforts, and of course can challenge the possibility in the future of establishing a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. Of course, we are not saying here that Iran has the main fault because of this. We know that the main problem in the Middle East is not so much Iran, but it's Israel. But in any case, a country like Iran leaving the NPT puts pressure on the treaty, and of course, it's a significant problem for regional initiatives in the Middle East in order to guarantee the non-proliferation of specific type of weapons, such as weapons of mass destruction. Then, of course, the third problem is that I identified, which again might be understood as something that it's outside the treaty, but that affects directly the treaty, is the rising proliferation discourse. Like, the international security landscape is becoming increasingly unpredictable, and of course, geopolitical polarization and conflict shifting alliances are straining long-standing security guarantees. For instance, we saw recently the NATO summit and how many countries inside NATO, well, not many countries, but there were some countries inside NATO that were already questioning the US engagement with the alliance. And in this case, of course, the return of Donald Trump to the US presidency raises new questions about the reliability of the US as a security partner, and more broadly, the future of arms control diplomacy if the United States decides disengaging from this kind of conversations and talks. Growing uncertainty about traditional security umbrellas, like the nuclear umbrella, is already creating conditions that could incentivize both vertical and horizontal nuclear proliferation. For instance, in Europe, in the European continent, right now, we have this kind of open debate between European states and European experts about the need to develop a so-called Eurobomb, that European states will have to pool resources in order to develop a European nuclear umbrella or a European nuclear bomb. Such developments, of course, illustrate a broader point, which is that in an unstable security environment, even states that have long championed non-proliferation may reconsider their options if they believe that their fundamental security interests are at risk. And here we can put, going back to the European example, we can put inside these countries that have or that are pushing forward this debate about the Eurobomb, for instance, a very traditional non-proliferation actor, which was non-proliferation country, sorry, which was Germany or Italy or Poland. So now we are seeing that these countries that had a very more cautious, very pro non-proliferation agenda, now they are rethinking this and reopening a debate that it's being conditioned by what happens on the other side of the Atlantic. Let's say, let's just going to put it like that. The new perception that the security guarantees are no longer dependable can create political space for argumentation or to argue in favor of this kind of debates. Although I personally, as a researcher, would not advise to go through that specific road, but that's a different debate. As well, if confidence in international security and the international security institutions that we have, such as the UN Security Council or the whole UN system, it's not taken into consideration anymore by most of the actors because they consider that this architecture is not useful to satisfy their security needs, then this architecture can collapse. And the NPT could collapse with this architecture, or could come again to this state of apathy by the state parties to the treaty, leading, of course, to countries to get out from the treaty, to withdraw from the treaty, and developing their own nuclear weapons programs. And of course, I mentioned before Iran, but another very likely candidate could be, for instance, South Korea, based on the current dynamics in the Korean Peninsula. The fourth point is, it's not so much related with the NPT directly, again, but it's an issue that could affect as well to the stability of the treaty on the short term, which is the whole debate that has raised again regarding nuclear testing. For more than 2 decades, we had this kind of global moratoria in terms of nuclear testing, with the exception of India and Pakistan at the end of the 90s, but then India agreed in 2005 to don't test anymore. And this has established a so-called nuclear test ban norm from a political point of view, not so much from a legal one, because as you know, CTBT has never entered into force. But this norm was more or less accepted by anyone, and we have seen very few nuclear testing in the 21st century, mostly I think only by North Korea, as far as I remember. So as a consequence, we can say that the global nuclear testing ban has had some effect. But now, and again, coming back to the issue that nuclear weapon states are modernizing their nuclear arsenals, here comes again the debate of the need of engaging in conducting nuclear testing, because they need to test their new weapons. Particularly the main country that has put forward this discussion, this kind of argument, has been China, but has also been followed by the US, by Russia, and as a consequence, there is right now a real possibility of traditional nuclear weapon states to conduct nuclear testing again, because of the need to test their new and modernized weapons. And as a consequence, nuclear testing will, of course, represent a challenge to the NPT, because in any case, it can be considered that this could lead to vertical proliferation, because these countries will require, to some extent, more nuclear fuel in order to be included in their nuclear explosive device in order to test these new weapons. So as a consequence, we can say that these countries are, if this happens, of course, this would be a challenge as well to the non-proliferation pillar, but also as well to the disarmament pillar of the NPT, because these countries will show to the world that they are actually not conducting disarmament conversations and disarmament activities as such. And finally, the fifth issue I want to raise, it's of course the TPNW. Again, an external thing outside the NPT treaty, the NPT, sorry, that affects the treaty, but not so much because of the existence of the TPNW per se, but because of the lack of consensus on the clear relationship or the direct relationship that the TPNW and the NPT could have. Like we have seen, or a big important set of the experts in the field have considered the NPT and the TPNW don't be complementary, and as a consequence to being in full competition for the implementation of Article 6 or the disarmament pillar in any case. As a consequence, I always thought that in order to reach progress in the disarmament pillar, there should be an effort by all the state parties, both state parties to the NPT and state parties to the TPNW, to look for the common things that can be extrapolated from one treaty to the other and try to combine efforts to reduce the friction between the two treaties. In any case, and this is important if we want to talk specifically about the disarmament pillar, I think that a broader truth must also be emphasized here, which is that progress on nuclear disarmament can occur and probably will occur within either the framework of the NPT, either the framework of the TPNW, or outside the framework of these treaties. And we have seen in the past very good or clear examples of arms control and reduction processes that took place outside the context of the NPT. Of course, these are not full disarmament processes, because there has not been full disarmament by the Soviet Union, Russia, and the United States. But it's true that there can be initiatives, activities, and discussions outside the context of these very highly structured and institutionalized treaties that actually could foster more disarmament than the discussions that we have in the context of the NPT. And that's something that we also should take into consideration. So in terms of wrapping up this first part of the presentation, I just wanted to convene to you and to conclude to you that the NPT is under strain. Of course, it's challenged internally by the persistent failure to implement key articles of the treaty, such as Article 6, also Article 4. I have not spoken about Article 4 and the problems of the implementation of Article 4, because that has always been considered to some extent a minor issue, but we can discuss it during the Q&A. And of course, externally, as I said, we have shifting geopolitical dynamics that threaten to dismantle the long-standing norms that the NPT wants to put forward. So I don't want you to consider these 5 points that I mentioned are like the whole truth, and it's a very comprehensive analysis about what are the challenges that faces the treaty as such. But just for you to know that these can be 5 key issues around the treaty, outside the treaty, that could put the treaty or are putting the treaty in strain, and that we should keep an eye on them in order to assess the future viability of the NPT on the long run. Now, I want to speak more in detail, let's say, about the NPT monitor. And as you might have seen, based on all the things that I discussed, you might see that you might now be thinking like, okay, what does this thing have to do with the NPT monitor? And I would say, or with our projects in the context of the NPT, well, the NPT monitor specifically tries to address one of the specific issues that I raised in one of these 5 points. Of course, we don't want you to think that the NPT monitor is going to be the whole salvation of the NPT. As at the end of the day, state parties are state parties, and they are the ones who need to save the treaty from potential apathy, political irrelevance, or even collapse, if someone wants to use that term. However, with the NPT monitor, what we are trying to address is a core concern that has been widely expressed by the NPT community. So that means both state parties, academics, civil society, and that without a comprehensive, impartial, and accessible framework to help monitor the implementation of the commitments made in the context of the NPT by the NPT state parties, it is very difficult to effectively track progress on the 3 pillars of the treaty. As I said, non-proliferation, disarmament, and peaceful usage. And with this, we aim to address with this approach, we aim to address one of the things that I mentioned in the first point I mentioned before, which is like there needs to be clear outcomes and timelines of implementation of those outcomes from the review conference, like specific actions and timelines to implement those actions to address the challenges of the treaty and to guarantee the well functioning of the treaty. And that's one of the things that we want to do with the NPT monitor, basically to see what has been agreed, to see what the state parties have agreed to, and what are they doing in order to implement those agreements, those specific what we call commitments in the context of the NPT review conference, such as the 2010 action plan, which is specifically the one that we are going to focus on in the context of the NPT monitor. Basically, what we aim to do is to take all the 64 action plans from the 2010 action plan and check what the state parties have been doing, both in the current review cycle and also before, in order to implement those 64 points of the action plan. In this regard, it's important for this specific first prototype or initial prototype of the NPT, just because for you to understand that we are moving ourselves in a very cautious and a very limited scope here, is that we want only to focus on the NPT, on the 5 NPT recognized nuclear open states. So basically the US, United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China. While we refine the framework through different feedback by the expert community that accesses the website. Sorry. At the end is to offer all stakeholders free, timely access to a high-quality actionable data on the implementation of past agreements, establishing the monitor, let's say, as a go-to source trusted by both officials, CSOs, and academics. We expect, in the context of the NPT monitor, to include both quantitative and qualitative indicators for the implementation of the actions of the action plan. And of course, in order to do that, we will employ native speaking country experts from the 5 nuclear open state countries in order to provide the data, an annual peer review analysis of each one of the nuclear open states. The results will be published on a website, which we hope it to be enoughly interactive to the users. And of course, we will also summarize those in a briefing paper that we will publish annually, enabling the users to quickly and easily compare the degree of implementation between the different nuclear open states. That's why we want the website to be quite interactive. So in any case, that would be in terms of what the NPT monitor, why the NPT monitor. It's being implemented. It's being designed and implemented right now. In terms of of a broader goal for you to get, if you want to get a clear idea about what we aim to do, it's to support the full implementation of the treaty. Okay, so still. This is a very broad goal, and from a more practical point of view, we are actually focusing on what has been done in the context of the specific commitments agreed during the review conference. But we want to be ambitious, so just for you to know that that's also our goal in terms of why we are developing this specific project. Also, just for you to know, and also for you to know better our projects in the context of both BASIC and the NPT program, this project is complementary to another project, which my colleagues will present in a future masterclass, which is the Nuclear Transparency Inventory, but will focus specifically on transparency practices of all nuclear possessors. So the 5 nuclear open states by the NPT, and the other nuclear armed states that are outside the NPT. In the case of the NPT monitor, it's only to focus right now, at least, on the 5 nuclear open states and what they have been doing in the last years in order to implement the 2010 action plan of 64 or the 64 points action plan. So far, right till now, we have both done well. We have implemented some of our activities in the context of the development timeline for this project. We have established our advisory board with experts from like a very varied geographical set of experts, to help us and assess us and provide advice in any case on the steps that we need to follow up for the implementation of this project. We have presented our first set of ideas and indicators that we want to look for in the context of the NPT monitor during the NPT PrepCom this year. The idea of the project and also what we are trying to look at was very well accepted or very well received, let's say, by the whole NPT community. They asked for some specifications or for some prioritization in terms of what actions of the action plan should we focus more than others. But in any case, either we will develop a first iteration of the monitor with some specific actions of the action plan, and then we will complement those with the rest of the actions of the action plan, because our idea is to be able to incorporate the 64 actions of the action plan in the website by after the 2026 review conference. And right now we are in a stage in which we are both we are finishing or being, let's say, we are clarifying the work that the web developers will have to perform in the context of the designing of the web, basically, of the website for the NPT monitor. And now also the next phase would be to contact the country experts for them to hire them and to gather the data for this first round of the NPT monitor. I think that that's everything from my side. I think that I've been speaking quite a lot. Sorry for that, and I'm sorry if some things were not clear or confusing. But I mean, I think that we have now the Q&A, and I will be more than happy to reply to any questions or comments that you want to raise.
Thank you so much, Manuel. That was really interesting. I saw actually we did have some people join us partway through, which I think speaks to the amount of interest there is in this topic. We do indeed have time now for Q&A. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function in Zoom, and I will call on you. Because of our technical difficulties, I'm on a mobile device, so Declan, please do chip in if people are raising hands and I'm not seeing them. Apologies in advance if that happens. Just to let everybody know, the masterclass is being recorded. If you would like to ask a question on camera, you're obviously very welcome to. If you prefer not to, you can leave your camera off, or you can post a message in the chat, question in the chat. I don't see any questions right now. I imagine some will be brewing. Oh no, I can see Thomas. Thomas would like to ask a question. Perhaps Thomas, you could introduce yourself
Sure.
to start off with. As probably most of you know, masterclasses are typically only attended by EVN members, but we've asked a couple of basic board members to join us today because I knew they'd be interested in this topic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. You sent me a mail, and here I am. Of course, it's a very important subject and project. I'm a member of the advisory board of BASIC with experience in nuclear disarmament diplomacy. I've worked for the Austrian Foreign Ministry for many years, and I think Manuel gave a very good introduction. And I think the project is really important. The idea to have finally a monitor on the NPT. I mean, it's almost strange because we have monitors on so many other disarmament treaties, and the one that is with us for more than 50 years didn't have one. So it's really about time that we get there. I may add a little bit to one point that Manuel made concerning the TPNW, because the situation is such they are not independent, totally different treaties. In fact, all the states parties of the TPNW are states parties of the NPT. So they are the same countries. Of course, not everyone who is in the NPT is joining the TPNW. Obviously, when you have nuclear weapons, you don't want to have them banned. And also those that think they are under a nuclear umbrella are not interested to join a prohibition of nuclear weapons. But what is clear is the NPT is a treaty that has quite a number of implementation treaties. Just think about the peaceful uses. There we have relatively high number, nuclear safety treaty and such things. And when you think about the nuclear disarmament pillar, there too, the NPT is a very short treaty. You need implementation treaties. You can say that the CTBT is already such a treaty, and definitely the DPNW is such a treaty, because when you want to get rid of nuclear weapons, you will need a norm to prohibit them. You have it as part of the Biological Weapons Treaty, you have it as part of the Chemical Weapons Treaty, but the NPT is much older, and there it is not contained. And there is no doubt, even when by some kind of elucidation, all nuclear weapon states would come to the conclusion we just destroy our nuclear weapons, the knowledge is there. So you need a legal norm to prohibit it. And actually, in the first phase, when there was a real campaign against the DPNW, a number of nuclear weapon states tried to come up with some points against the treaty, which mostly were not very well based. And one of those was that the treaties don't rhyme. And for that reason, a lot has been published on this. And I think at the last PrEPCom, it was only one country, France, that still came with this argument. So from my point of view, I followed this quite carefully over the years. I think there's a remnant of a propaganda, but in reality, it's not such a problem. But what, of course, is, as I see it, the real problem for the NPT is that one side didn't really fulfill its implementation. That's the nuclear weapons, because it's an unequal treaty. One side said, yes, we will not develop nuclear weapons, but therefore the other side has to do nuclear disarmament. And after more than 50 years, we don't see a lot of progress, and especially over the last years, I mean, there's rather a backlash. And we have heard these speeches that from nuclear weapon states, the others should not get nuclear weapons, but for us, it's responsible, it's good, and so on. But we have also heard political leaders of non-nuclear weapon states claiming that no, when the others have it, we should have it too. And there's even a NATO state like Turkey, and we have heard recently similar tones also from Poland and so on. So that's the real problem, that more and more non-nuclear weapon states are considering to get nuclear weapons, especially since there are now doubts about whether the US would really use their nuclear weapons to protect a certain ally. And in reality, that's not new, because nobody who was well informed ever thought that the US would would risk the destruction of their major cities for a small country somewhere in Central Europe. But now it has become so evident, and there's a big push for nuclear disarmament right now. So thank you so much. And I will follow a little bit the discussion, but then I will have to leave. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Manuel, I can see your hand is up. Did you want to respond directly to that?
Yes. First, I mean, it's always when you find someone in your room like Thomas with so much experience in the field, it's always a little bit difficult on knowing how to reply. But no, I just wanted to make one comment. It's more a comment based on what he just mentioned about what are the challenges that we are facing in order to implement the disarmament pillar. And I think that people like that, we have actually done studies or comparative studies across regimes, like we have tried to compare nuclear, bio, and chemical. We always reach quite a similar conclusion to some extent, particularly when we compare with chemicals. Like one of the successes of the Chemical Weapons Convention was first establishes a clear provision for a full set of weapons. Second, has the OPCW. And believe me, the OPCW is a very, very powerful tool in order to guarantee full chemical disarmament. The problem is that the NPT does not establish a clear provision. There is no proper provision for nuclear weapons in the context of the NPT, and that's a problem. And that's why, for instance, CPNW, it's right when it says, like, we are coming here to address a legal vacuum vis-a-vis the provision of weapons, because the NPT does not prohibit nuclear weapons as such. It only prohibits some countries to actually don't have those weapons. And second, we don't have proper institutional backing for implementing all the treaties as a whole, and specifically the disarmament pillar. Some people say that the IAEA works as the OPCW, but the work of the IAEA, it's way more comprehensive, way more broad than what the OPCW does, and cannot be compared, and of course has a very contradictory task to perform, which is like needs to foster non-proliferation while promoting the peaceful uses of nuclear energy and the expansion of nuclear science and technology. So, it's a very contradictory role for the IAEA that implements in the best of its capacity. So just wanted to comment on that. So I think that, as Thomas just mentioned, like the scene in the context of the NPT is like, we don't have a clear provision, and we don't have a clear or well-established institutional framework for implementation. And that's it. And I'm sorry, because I think that my screen is blurred, but I don't know why.
It is a little. We mentioned this in our work meeting. Sometimes Manuel looks like he's in a witness protection program, and that's how he's looking today. But we will continue, and we can hear you loud and clear, so that's good. I think the next question was from Adila. Feel free, Adila, if you wish to put your video on to ask a question, do so. If not, just put it verbally. If you could just give your full name and any institutional affiliation you want to share with us, that would be great.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Adila Ahmed. I'm a PhD candidate. I'm from Pakistan, and I'm also an EVN member. And it's great to have in the masterclass. And I really enjoyed the discussion. And the point I want to make, and Thomas really talk about that perspective as well, because my perspective is also that if nuclear deterrence remains central to great power security, as we have observed in the last 2-3 crises. So how can be a meaningful disarmament under NPT can be happen? And I think it will be a more rhetorical promise. So I think it fundamentally incompatible with the state survival logic. And as we have observed that how states are more, it is more of the political will of the states that they are going toward that. And I would just want to add more, a very important point, I think, is that as we have in the third nuclear age, right? And how we are observing about the growing technologies and how they are disrupting the system. And for example, as we talk about AI-enabled systems, hypersonics, deep strikes, and all about cyber threats and all these things. And most important thing that is really developing is quantum computing, and how it is going to change the structure. So when I deeply studied this thing, I sometimes correlated with it is quantum computing is not just like the nuclear bomb, that how it is going to, with the information it can have the in the future it can have the potential for strategic paralysis, and how it is going to toward a destruction like just nuclear weapons have in the 45. So I think there is need for more frameworks beyond NPT that also include such technologies as well. And as we have observed that how norms and ethics regarding these technologies are not enforcing, and it is just a debate, and that's what's happened going on. We all see under TGE and CWC. So I think the risk has been multiplied, and The point is that I want to make, it is just about the political will of leadership that they are going toward that, and it remain under stress, such treaties. So this is my perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that contribution. Manuel, did you want to respond to that? Or
Sure. I will try to respond in a very concise way. First of all, Adila, many thanks for your comment. I understand this more as a comment than as a question, but to some extent, there's also some issue there to be answered. I mean, I remember when I was studying in my bachelor degree, and my professor of international public law, she used to say, like, international law works till you reach politics. So political will, it's always an impediment to the implementation of some principles of international law. And I fully agree with you that, if great powers still see deterrence as a must, to guarantee their own security, such, I mean, then disarmament is not feasible by these by these countries. I mean, that's clear. This is why, for instance, there are elements that I mentioned before that are outside the NPT that condition fully the working procedures, the working proceedings, and the political debate in the context of the NPT, and of course, the security environment and deterrence, as my colleague Lyndon puts it forward, can be considered, for instance, as he says, the ghost pillar of the NPT, because it's always present and it's always been used as an indirect excuse to don't disarm. Regarding emerging technologies, fully agree with you, and on this point. And again, as I said before, for instance, there was in the past means or discussions that could be conducted between nuclear weapon states in order to proceed to arms control and reduction processes of their nuclear arsenals that took place outside the context of the NPT. And there were frameworks, alternative frameworks and alternative legal instruments. I'm thinking about ABM, SALT, INF, START, etc. All of those conversations took, and all those treaties exist outside the context of the NPT. So as a consequence, for sure, emerging technologies and the discussion about the implication and inclusion of emerging technologies in command and control systems, for instance, of nuclear arsenals, these are discussions and conversations that for sure will have to take place outside the context of the NPT. And to some extent, they're already taking place in the few cases that had happened, particularly with the context in the context of artificial intelligence. This has been mostly bilateral and informal discussions, so nothing structured. But I think that as these technologies evolve, and as leaders in the different nuclear weapon states, or the big powers, as you want to define them as well, start to see and will further understand the emerging threat that they pose, both to them, but also to the arsenals and the contrary arsenals, they will have to reach more structured set of agreements in this regard in order to manage these emerging technologies. This for sure doesn't need to be separated from the conversations that unfortunately are not evolving in any way in the context of the group of governmental experts for the certain conventional weapons, where we address all the issues about drones and killing robots and so on and so forth. But for instance, one way that could be achieved this kind of context or framework to address emerging technologies would be to establish a specific working groups of governmental experts from these countries to tackle on a case-by-case scenario each one of the technologies, and then establish a specific set of, or a specific legal instrument to address and control that specific technology.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, that was not concise at all. I'm sorry.
You were trying, I can tell. We have a couple of questions which I'll get to, as we did start a little late, and my apologies again for the technical issues that meant that happened. The next question was from Kudukashwe. If you would like to put your camera on while you ask a question, please do. If not, verbally is fine. And maybe just introduce yourself and any organizational affiliation, and if you could keep it brief, that would be great.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, like what you said, my name is Kuda. Based in Pretoria, South Africa. I'm an Arcona fellow. Thank you for the presentation. It was really insightful. I have a few questions based on your remarks. The first one is concerning the TPNW and the relationship you briefly mentioned with the NPT. I just wonder, with the security developments we are witnessing right now in Iran and Israel, the attack of nuclear installations by nuclear weapon states, uh, how do you see this shifting, or has this in any way, aiding on or promoting the shift of conception of the TPNW as a legal regime that complements the NPT, with consideration that, like, the Article 10 of the NPT, it's loosely framed and it's subject to exploitation as far as interpretation. All these developments we are seeing right now, with prospects of withdrawal by Iran, has this in any way caused some form of a shift in consideration of the TPNW as a reinforcing treaty to the NPT? The second question, and the last one, is on these attacks again we're witnessing of nuclear weapon states outside of the NPT attacking a member of the NPT. Does this in any way add more fuel or ignite in some shape and form the campaign by non-nuclear weapon states of having negative security assurances? Thank you.
Sorry. Well, Kuda, many thanks for your questions. On the first one, I'm not so sure that these the recent events that we have seen in the context of the Israel-Iran war and the bombings by the US on the Iranian enrichment facilities has actually initiated or fostered the debate on the complementarity of the NPT and the TPNW. I don't think that, I mean, as far as I understand, this has not been addressed in any way. At least I have not read anything about that, mostly because either there has been invoked international maritime law to in this case, because that's specific in the Geneva Conventions, the issue about the attacks on nuclear facilities. But second was more addressed as well in the context of the NPT, because one country specifically asked to or has already stated more or less that its parliament has stated that it's willing to leave the NPT. So I have not seen this kind of fostering complementarity between the TPNW and the NPT as a result of the current conflict, but I might be wrong on this. On the issue of the negative security assurances, I think that this debate, I mean, it's, and here I would agree with you, this event, the thing that happened between Iran and Israel, and of course the US bombings, have done two important things. One has shown, or at least has put forward, the fallacious argument, let's say, that without nuclear weapons you cannot guarantee your own security. And for instance, the Iranian movement the Iranian parliament movement to actually call for the withdrawal of Iran from the NPT could already point out us towards that direction, that Iran foresees the necessity to develop this type of weapon potentially in order to guarantee its own security. But the second effect that has had these attacks are the fact that non-nuclear weapon states are first demanding more negative security assurances by the nuclear weapon states. And the problem would be how the nuclear weapon states will react to that demand, or how that demand could be formalized. Because we know that in the specific cases of the nuclear weapons free zones, it's more or less clear, but in other cases, not. But that would be one of the key concerns if the nuclear weapon states, particularly after, as a result of what the Americans have done, or also what the Russians have done vis-a-vis Ukraine, are willing to reopen the debate on negative security assurances. And that would be vital, because if the non-nuclear weapon states perceive that that this demand is not going forward, or is not being taken seriously by nuclear weapon states, then this will foster, again, the first point I mentioned by replying to your question, like that non-nuclear weapon states will perceive the need to acquire this type of weapons as a means in order to guarantee their own defense. And again, I remit again to what I said in the context of my presentation. You see some European countries already putting this forward. You see South Korea, Iran, Turkey, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, a lot of voices are emerging on this regard, and I think that the negative security assurance debate and the discussion should be treated like very seriously by the nuclear weapon states. I hope that this answers your question.
Thanks very much. I can see one hand up, but I think we probably won't have time for you. I'm so sorry. But there was one question that came into the chat. Declan, are you able to read that out for us? And then Manuel, if you could quickly respond, and then I think we probably need to wrap it up. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's an excellent question as well, actually, from Dina Torfik. So the question is, how is Article X? Sorry, that is 10, isn't it? I'm just added. I had a little nervous about my Roman numerals. So yeah, Article 10 of the NPT meant to be implemented in practice. Given the controversy around the DPRK's withdrawal, what are the legal implications if Iran was to withdraw, especially in light of the vagueness of what the treaty defines as extraordinary events that can affect a state's supreme interests? Can the events that recently occurred justify the withdrawal? So yeah, that's the question. I think it's a really great question as well. So over to you, Manuel.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And there's also a response from Thomas in the chat that people might be interested in, but please let's, Manuel, go ahead.
Oh, well, actually, I'm going to read Thomas' reply. Yes, I mean, of course, the problem of Article 10 is that it's relatively weak, and I would fully agree with Thomas on that point. I mean, Article 10 has a bit of an issue, has a bit of a problem, and that's why it's really a headache, because there have been also debates on whether, Article 10 it's a legal obligation because it's stated on the treaty as such, or because or it's not actually as it is stated as a legal obligation, in terms of the notification that you need to provide, because some states and some also legal experts just said, like, no, according to the Vienna Convention on the Laws of the Treaty, withdrawing from a treaty is a sovereign decision. As a consequence, you just notify, and if they accept your withdrawal, it's fine. If not, you withdraw equally. There is no further issue to be raised here. As a consequence, has always been in this kind of very blurred space. Second, the main problem with Article 10 is that, which goes back to one of the main problems of the NPT as such, is that trying to reform Article 10 in order to make it more explicit, or more, not only explicit, but more delimited in terms of what are the conditions that actually could be taken as justifiable in order to withdraw, and what are the measures that the state parties of the treaty, the IAA and the UN, will take as a result of the withdrawal towards that withdrawing party to the treaty, would require to implement the Article 8.3 of the NPT, which is the provision for reform. And if you read how Article 8 it's draft, it's impossible to reform the treaty. Sorry, not 8.3. I think it's a different point, but it's in any case Article 8. It's impossible to reform the treaty, because the conditions to reform any of the articles of the treaty are really, Herculean. It's almost impossible to reform the NPT as it is drafted in that specific treaty. But that would require Article 10 in order to make it more explicit, clear, and delimited in terms of the things that could be that we could take into consideration for withdrawal, and also the measures in order to contain some of the activities of the withdrawing party and or condition the withdrawing party. It's almost impossible. There were already in 2022, the 2022 REFCON, there were attempts by the Vienna group to submit a proposal for revising or establishing some conditions for the implementation of Article 10, I think that the United States also presented a working paper on that, but at the end they were not put forward. They were not put forward on the draft for the final conclusions of the conference. But yeah, the issue of the withdrawal of the treaty is going to be very problematic. I even myself presented a set of proposals, not so much in terms of reform, but in terms of conditions that we should take into consideration, or the state parties need to take into consideration in order to accept the withdrawal. But again, also some colleagues explained to me like that's a big no-no, because the Vienna Convention on the Law of the Treaties allows a state party just to withdraw because it's a sovereign right of a state party to withdraw from any treaty. So Article 10 is a little bit of a conundrum, I would say.
Thank you so much, Manuel, and thank you for all those really excellent questions and contributions. They're all very much appreciated. As is typical with our masterclasses, when we have edited the recording of this, it will be posted online for everyone to see. It only remains for me then to thank once again Manuel Herrera for joining us and giving us the benefit of all of his knowledge and insight. Very much appreciated, and obviously do keep an eye out for developments in the NPT Monitor project. Everyone at BASIC is very excited about that, and I think it has a lot of potential to be a really, really great and long-lasting tool for everybody who has an interest in the treaty. So thank you very much. We will be having more masterclasses coming into the autumn. And so do look out for news about those. That will be coming very soon. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting, Dave. Bye.